Hello, good afternoon in Brussels. It might be other times in other parts of the planet, but let's call that I will have people in Brussels following me. And I think that I'm a little bit too soon. I still have 4 minutes to go, so I would rather wait for the other participants to show up. We are I'm going to present the CBTs with obviously people going for EPSO competitions, then they know what we are talking about. So the important thing is here to say that it's the first test or the first testing in the EPSO selection process. But having said so, this is not only in EPSO, that means European institutions, but in a lot of other selection processes across the world. So that is why if ever you are interested to go for, let's say, World Bank or UN or African Bank for Reconstructions or a big company, you should expect to have numerical abstract situational reasoning tests, which are the CBTs we are going to talk about today. So it's a way to say that obviously I'm thinking mostly about my clients that are going for the European institutions, but the same applies to all the other tests that you are doing for other selection processes across the world, and therefore, and the comments that I will make today, and obviously the training courses that I'm proposing are very useful for this purpose. So, because I'm checking the time, right? 2 minutes to go. So, because we are now, I'm going to talk about the three. Still, because I have 2 minutes, I would just like to say that this is the first test that normally comes after the application form, and that is why, as I have 1 minute left, that let me talk about the application form, where the important thing to mention is that if you are serious about a selection process, then do very seriously the application form. Now, for the European institutions, we have 3 papers or 3 documents that we should do, which is the CV. And then normally you will have a motivation, which are 4 questions, and then you will have a talent screener if you're going for the specialist competitions. So we are talking about 3 documents, fundamentally important to have them well done. And so that will be the first, let's say, step in your selection process. And then we are going to CBT, which is the computer-based test, which are the ones that I'm going to discuss this afternoon. Now, just in order to be clear about the 3 tests, they have, different numbers. Let's be 20 will be verbal, 10 numerical, and 10 abstract. And then there is obviously a way to calculate the scores in order to qualify or not for the next stage. But what is important, let me see if I have questions. So what is important to have in mind that even though they will say you need a minimum 10 or 50% or so, I would rather advise you to prepare very seriously and to make much more than 50%. Because I'm saying is, let's imagine that you are an employer and you have to select people. So would you select somebody who has done 50%, which is the threshold, or are you going to select someone who has done 90% or 80%? Now, I would say it's obvious that if you are an employer, you will go for the maximum, let's say, for the same salary that you are going to give. or you are going for the one having the best scores, because in theory you will think that he is, let's say, smarter, or at least he has more facility in one or the other domain. So because of that, let's say, preconception in the mind of your employer, which would be, I would say, in our mind, all of us, I would rather say, get a very serious practice of these exercises in order to get the highest score possible, right? And don't satisfy yourself with the 50%. I don't think that this is enough. Good. Now that this is said, let's go for the numerical reasoning. The first thing that I was saying, the numerical reasoning, which is fundamental, is that you, like I'll say, all the participants in the competition, you have 12 years of education up to the baccalaureate. You have then 5 years, let's say, with a bachelor, master, probably another postgraduate. So what I'm saying is that you have so many years of education during which you applied a certain way of doing verbal reasoning, right? And even now, listening to me, you apply verbal reasoning. Makes sense? You are listening to what I'm saying. You are trying to memorize, to extract the essential elements in what I say, and then to organize them in your memory so that you could reuse it, use them, this information, these elements next time. Which means that you have a certain way to listen or to read, to extract the information and to memorize the information in order then to use it. Which means that for a verbal test, this is what I will ask you to do. Read the text first. Because in any case, this is the way you are doing. So don't learn for your verbal reasoning test something that you have never done before. Right? Don't start by applying some fantastic method when you have a method that you use for the last 20 years, if not more, because not only you have done all the education with this method, but then all your professional life you have done the same thing. You read, then you extract the information, like say the essence of that, then you memorize it, that means you organize it in your memory, and then hopefully once it's there, then you could retrieve it when you need. So for me, the 3 steps on the verbal reasoning is: number 1, read the text. And when I say read the text, you organize the text in let's say ideas, in like bullet points. And this is the way that you process already the text, right? So you read the text, and when you read, you organize it already, you process it already in ideas. Now, because we are in an EPSO competition, it might be that you will have what? 5 ideas? Not more. Which is that you could even keep that these ideas on your fingers. Step number 1, right? Step number 2, now that you know the text, that now that you understood the communication, now you go to the options. And because you understood the logic of the communication, you understood the, let's say, the essence of the communication. That's why I'm talking about process the text, process that paragraph that you receive. Now, therefore, you could go to the option and you could say, yes, this is correct, the text said so, or no, this is not correct, the text doesn't say so. But what I'm asking you to concentrate on, the second point, is on rejecting, refusing the options that are not in accordance in the logic of the text. So that's the step number 2. You refuse, you reject, you drop the options that are not acceptable because they are going in contradiction with the text of origin. Now you go for the step number 3, and now only you could go for the options, let's say, they have a certain similarity, they have a certain sense, let's say, or they are quite close to the text of origin. And then I will ask you to double check them in the text of origin, because it might be that there will be, how to say that, small details that will make the difference. So you should check in the text of origin, because obviously these small details you didn't learn when you process the text and when you memorize the text in the first place. So just to repeat, number one, you read the text of origin and you organize or you process that learning, that reading, by cutting it in ideas and memorize the essence of these ideas so that you put it in the memory. I'm talking about the short-term memory. So you put these ideas in the short-term memory. Then you go to the number two. Step number two, you take the options and you reject, you drop the options that go against the text of origin. And this will be in theory quite easy, because you learn the text of origin, you got the meaning of the text of origin. So now it's quite easy to reject the options that go in contradiction. And the step number three, now you take the one or two options that are left, and they are left because they are close to the meaning of the text of origin, they are close to the comprehension that you have about that, and you go back to the text of origin in order to compare these options that are, let's say, acceptable, and you compare them with the text of origin to be sure that you do not miss a detail, and or you need that detail in order to say yes or no to these things. And with that, let me check whether I have questions to be sure that I'm clear, and hopefully hopefully I'm clear, and if not, feel free to send me a comment in the, well, we have a chat box here. So this is the first, let's say, of course, very short summary about how do we proceed with the verbal reasoning. And then, if just 1 minute to close this presentation about the verbal reasoning, I would say go for practice and choose as much as you can the best quality text, right? So don't be so worried about the language. So if you need to do Italian, you don't necessarily need to do the text in Italian. I would rather go for a very good text in English or a very good text in French and rehearse my verbal reasoning with very high quality text than to do my practice with a low quality Italian text. I don't think is useful. I think, on the contrary, is quite annoying when the text is of bad quality, because then it doesn't allow you to practice the real essence of the verbal reasoning, because you have to fight with the inability of the text or the poor quality of the text. So in order to practice, I would say choose, search for the highest quality text you can, and obviously then depends on the number of languages you have and the sources you find. But the condition for me in order to do a good practice is to go for a very high quality text, and therefore your ability to work is much more enhanced than to fight where the text is a low quality, and at the end you don't even understand what the text is saying. So this is to close the verbal reasoning test. Now we go to the abstract reasoning. On the abstract reasoning, I say, there is a good positive, how would I say that, understanding, which is that the abstract reasoning is in fact an intelligence test. Which means that if you are intelligent, well, in theory, you will do the abstract reasoning and you don't need much. Exactly. I see here a comment that the PT is that poor quality is transferred to exam questions as well. Absolutely. I agree with you. And that's why if somebody has the possibility to use French, English, or German, I would rather stay in these languages. So, because as soon as we go for other languages, let's say out of our 20 and so languages of the Union, then I'm afraid that the quality is not good. And if the quality is not good, you cannot perform, not because you are not good in verbal reasoning, but because the text is so poor that you don't even understand what the text wants. So I agree with Pearson, and I would say, yes, if you can choose, stay in French, English, or German. But that's another story. Now we go to the abstract reasoning, and I said is the abstract reasoning is an intelligence test, right? So intelligence means that if you're intelligent in theory, you understand what's there because it's a pattern recognition. Now again, pattern recognition is that you check the first feature and the second feature, and then you say, okay, between these two, what happened? I'm calling them count, number the transformations that you see, because by counting the transformations, then you are able to see a pattern. And this is what the abstract reasoning is about. So you stay in this pattern recognition and from the feature 1 to feature 2, and then because you started to understand or to feel or to have an instinct about, you could say, let's say, guess the pattern. So the step number 1 in abstract reasoning is check the transformation to the feature 1 to 2 and guess the rule, right? So it's important to stay there, to look at all the transformations so that by observing, let's say, observing the reality, you are able to guess the rule. So this is the rule, the step number 1. Then step number 2, you go with the same approach. So you compare the feature 2 to feature 3, and then again, you count the transformations. Now, by counting the transformations, hopefully, in theory, you will be able to confirm the rule. So again, when I say count the transformation, you force yourself to pay attention to the transformations, and then by paying attention, in theory, you will be able to feel again the rule. Therefore, you will be able to have a confirmation of the rule. So this was the step number 2. And then we go to the step number 3, where you are now able to create the rule. And here, I insist on the fact that do not look at the results. This is not the approach, and obviously it's not useful, because if you stay in the rule that you saw or you invented or you, let's say, had an intuition about, right? You stay in your creative mind, and in your creative mind, it's able then to create, obviously it's a creative mind, it's able to create the next feature. And this is what we are talking about in the abstract reasoning, that you create the next feature. You do not pick it up from a list of options or a list of possible results. So what I would say that if you indeed spend your time, number 1, in guess the rule by counting the transformations, then you have a second step where you confirm the rule by checking again the transformations. Then on the step number 3, you're able to create the next feature, and only when it's created then you go to your results or the solutions or the options, and then you identify the one that you have. So for me, with that, I say again, you will do quite well and in a more efficient way than checking the solutions. So obviously, I had in my experience so many clients who came with their, I would call that twisted approach on checking all the time the solutions in order to guess from the solution which solution is acceptable. And certainly for me, this is not the way to approach. By the way, I have a master in mathematics. Obviously, comes very handy when I do abstract and numerical reasoning and so. And when in the mathematics university we do abstract reasoning, we do not have options, right? So we do have the features 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's a question mark, which is the next one, and that's all. There is no option so that we could choose from. We have to create, and that's everything we can respond. So I would say that if you keep that in mind, you stay in the creative mind, and then by guessing, then confirming the rule, the third step, which is the creation, comes very natural, or comes very in a fluid manner from the step number 1 and 2. Now, just to close this comment about the abstract reasoning and to say how would you practice, well, again, obviously pay attention to the sources that you go to practice from, because the quality of the source is fundamental for your, I would say, emotional well-being. Imagine that you choose a book or an online platform, right, where the exercises are either too easy and you believe that you are on the top of the world, or they are so complicated that you believe that you are, incompetent, and both of them are not useful, right? So what you need is to have a source of exercises that presents exercises that are very similar or very close in the level of difficulty with the EPSO exercises. And if so, then you could do the practice, and you know that you are practicing something that makes sense to your EPSO competition, right? Either if you practice something that is very easy, or you practice something that is so much more complicated, then you do not respond to the level of difficulty of your exam. So your practice, let's call it, is inappropriate, right? Not relevant. And obviously, that's, let's say, the first, or the test that you have to do every time. Go back to the EPSO website, check the level of difficulty, and then this should be your gauge throughout the exercises. That means that you have to stay on the same level of difficulty of the EPSO competition, and hopefully by practicing in the same level of competence, then your preparation is appropriate, is relevant. And if you find exercises that are either too easy or too difficult, you just drop them. Don't spend your time in these kind of things, because at the end of the day, I would say you don't learn much, or you learn but they are not relevant, this learning. And most of all, what I observe with my clients is that practicing, let's say, obviously too difficult exercises make them like, how to say, depressed. You understand what I'm saying? So they lose enthusiasm, they lose energy, they lose the motivation to do the practice, because that looks for them overwhelming. So because of that, the matching of the level of difficulty of your practice with the level of difficulty of your exam, it's fundamental. So it's like, imagine that you have to run, I don't know, a marathon, right? Then you do not train, which is 42 kilometers, right? Then you don't run in your practice 100 kilometers. Well, I mean, probably sometimes you have to run a little bit more than 42, but I would say that the normal practice should not be at 100 kilometers. That's my thinking. And so in the same way, for your, let's say, abstract reasoning, you go for something that is similar to the EPSO abstract reasoning exercises, the difficulty, and hopefully if you match that level of difficulty, then in the exam you'll perform, let's say, at the right level. So, and again, now happy here we don't have language, so in theory it's a little bit easier because the abstract reasoning should not be translated in different languages, so hopefully that you are not that dependent on the translation, let's say, the quality of the translation. So now let me move to the last, which is the numerical reasoning. And what I would say here, first and foremost, be sure that you have revised, let's say, and if you don't know, be sure that somebody is teaching you the rule of three, right? It's one rule. You don't need other rules. It's just one for all the numerical reasoning of the EPSO competitions, the rule of three. And then once you have done the rule of three and you know it, you master it, then only I would say go for the numerical reasoning. And well, I have to say that I recovered, let's say, clients who have done humanistic studies, therefore rule of three they didn't understand much about, or they didn't understand at all, and I kind of teach them again from scratch the rule of three, and they got it. It's not rocket science, makes sense, and then they got it, and then they went into the numerical reasoning with a very strong, let's say, instrument in hand. And then once you have this instrument, as I said, then again, we go in 3 steps. Number one, and this is fundamental, is read the question, right? Especially the ones of you who are intuitive. It's very important to calm down and to read the question and to understand the question, but not on the words of the question. I mean, not only on the words of the question, but to understand the questions in the question in the meaning of the question. So it's like you have to understand the question and to be able to translate it, let's say, or to rephrase it in your mind in a very clear, very logical way. And only then, if you understood the question, then you move from the question. If not, don't do anything else. Stay on the question until you get what they want. So this is the step number one. The step number two is, if you understood the question, then you can go in creating, let's say, a strategy for a resolution. So you create a way to solve the problem. You create a strategy, I call it, right? Now, don't exaggerate. We are in an EPSO competition, and a numerical reasoning can have what? 2 rules of 3, 1 or 2 simple operations. So we are talking about what? 5 max calculations, max. So what I'm saying on the step number 2, I say create these 5 operations or 3 operations, put them, I mean, create them in your mind like I will do first and second and third. This is your strategy for resolution. So once you understood the question, you do the strategy. And only then in the step number 3, then you go and calculate. And I do understand that, yes, you have 2 minutes and you're, let's say, panicking about not respecting the timing and not doing enough and blah, blah. But if you don't understand the question and if you don't have a strategy, your calculation might be absolutely wrong. So there is no point. unless you see crystal clear what is the question, what is that they want from you. Then, how do I get that? And then 3, how do I apply this calculation? So with these 3 steps, you're out of the exercise. And the point, let's say, what I'm making is that you have to follow these 3 steps in a proper order, because the risk is that if you jump into calculation, or if you jump into, you know, like without really considering the strategy, what it might happen is that in the middle of the calculation, you forgot what is that you are doing. You forgot what's the point of your calculations. So that is why before getting into the calculation, which is, let's say, a very hot moment, it's better to create, I mean, first to understand the question, obviously, but then it's better to have this step number 2 where you create your strategy. And when, and you create your strategy, let's say, with a in a cool moment, still with a cold head, right? And then only then you are going to calculate. And by respecting the step 1, 2, 3, as I said, I saw my clients coming back or doing the numerical reasoning when they consider that they will never, ever do numerical reasoning in a competition. So that is to say, yes, it is possible. Obviously, that demands practice. So again, we are going back to how do you practice? Well, unfortunately, in numerical reasoning, you need to have, let's say, a good understanding of the language. So a lot of difficulty comes not necessarily from the rule of 3, that means from the calculations you have to do, but a lot of the difficulty comes from the understanding of the question. So if there is to practice, I would say be sure that your understanding of the question is correct, and that's the way you will start the practice. And once this is correct, say that you understand correctly the question, then you go for the step number 2, which is conceive a strategy, right? And the strategy has 2, 3, 4 operations. And then only you go on the applying the strategy. That means doing the proper calculations. Obviously, you imitate as much as you can the competition situation, because you, let's say, because you have to have, let's say, not only the ability to do this, but the ability to push the buttons of your calculator and to have kind of speed on doing that. And hopefully by having this speed, you gain time when effectively you will go into the calculations. And I have here Sophia, who says that there is more than the rule of 3. Well, I do see, or I do hear what you're saying. Well, my experience is no. My clients are bringing back exams, situations or exam problems for the exam, and the only thing we needed to do is the rule of 3. So unless you send me, you show me, or send me a problem that cannot be solved with the rule of 3, then that's the challenge. I will leave, for the moment, I'm saying that the only rule that we used was the rule of 3, which means that at the end of the day, it's not such a big fuss. And then I would say, once you have done the rehearsal or the preparation or the practice for each of them, to be sure that you got every exercise, let's say, well clarified in your mind, well structured in your mind, I would say then you go into the practice as in the exam. So you put together the packages of the exam, and then at least one exam a day will be the way that you practice. And with that, in theory, you should do well. I think that we have consumed our time. Thank you very much for your attention. I will invite you obviously to the website where we published the May program, which as usual it comes every Saturday and every Sunday from 10 to 12. And so this is one. And then secondly, obviously, the individual sessions where I could have in one-on-one and to take care of your particular demands. And with all that, thank you for the attention and see you soon in one of these means around. Thank you.